Hey everyone, ready to dive into a really cool topic, like how our brains take all these sights and sounds and feelings and turn them into one whole experience.
It's something we take for granted, right? That sense of wholeness.
Totally. And today we're exploring a book that tackles this head on. It's called Experienced Wholeness, Integrating Insights from Gestalt Theory, Cognitive Neuroscience, and Predictive Processing by Wanja Wiese.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating read. I mean, it gets at a really fundamental question, one that's stumped philosophers and scientists for ages. How do we experience a world that feels coherent, even though our senses are constantly bombarded with information?
Right. Like it's chaos out there, but somehow we make sense of it. And Wise's book tries to answer that by combining cutting edge neuroscience with some classic Gestalt psychology.
Yeah, and you know what I like? Right off the bat, the book lays out two big challenges.
Yeah. And what are those?
Well, how can we even describe this feeling of unity? Like, how do we put it into words in a way that makes sense?
And the second one.
Oh, right. How could a system like the brain actually create this unified experience?
Yeah, those are some pretty big questions.
They are. But I think what's cool is the book tries to explain these complex ideas in a way that you don't need like a PhD to understand.
Right. It makes it accessible. So where does it start?
Well, it starts by challenging our assumptions about what unity even means, you know?
Okay, interesting. So what we think we know about it might not be the whole picture.
Exactly. Chapter 2 talks about this difference between partial unity and full unity.
Okay. I'm curious, what's that about?
Well, imagine you're hearing a bird singing, right?
Okay, yeah.
But you're also seeing it perched on a branch.
Gotcha. So you're experiencing it with multiple senses.
Right. So that's a kind of unity, yeah. You're experiencing this bird as one thing.
Yeah, I get that.
But you can still separate those experiences in your mind, right? Like you can focus on the sound or the sight independently.
Yeah, that's true. I never really thought about it like that.
It's subtle, but it matters. Because it makes us ask, well, what about your experience right now? Like, think about it. Are there things you're aware of that feel more connected than others?
Whoa, that's trippy. Yeah, I guess there are. It's like some things feel more blended together than others.
Right. And this idea of varying degrees of unity, that's going to be important as we go deeper.
Okay, so even the basic idea of unity is more complex than we might think.
Totally. And then in chapter 4, the book throws in this whole other concept. It's called the phenomenological Bradley problem.
Oh, wow, that sounds intimidating.
Yeah, no, the name is a mouthful. But bear with me, it's actually a pretty cool idea. Basically, it asks, how do two experiences get glued together to create a unified whole without needing an infinite chain of glue?
Okay, I think I see what you mean. Like you wouldn't want glue to glue to glue forever.
Exactly. That would be kind of ridiculous.
So how does the book propose we get around that problem?
Well, the book is kind of like, hold on, maybe it's not about glue at all. It gives us three possible solutions, and they each have these mind-blowing implications.
All right, lay it on me. What are the solutions?
Okay, so the first one is the idea of a phenomenal fundament. It suggests there's this single fundamental experience that underlies everything else.
Like a universal glue.
Kind of. It's like saying all of our experiences, even though they seem so different, are connected at a very deep level.
Wow, that's kind of a profound idea.
It is. Okay, so then there's the phenomenal glue solution. And this one says there's some extra ingredient added to bind experiences together.
Like a special mechanism in the brain that's designed to create unity.
Exactly. And if this were true, finding this glue would be huge for understanding how consciousness works.
I bet. That's pretty exciting.
And the third solution is called phenomenal dispositions. This one takes a different approach. It says unity isn't about adding something extra, but more about how experiences are related to each other.
Okay, so it's not about what they contain, but how they interact.
Right. It's like asking, what makes a cake taste like a cake? Is it a secret ingredient? Or is it the way the flour, sugar, and eggs all transform each other during baking?
It's more about the process than the individual parts.
Exactly. This solution suggests our experience might work similarly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So we've got these different ideas about what unity might be, but then the book throws another curveball at us, right?
Oh, yeah. Chapter 5 introduces this concept of multiplicity. And it basically says, hold on, there isn't just one type of unity, one global oneness.
Okay, so it's not just like everything's a one big blob of experience.
Nope. It's saying there are actually many different types of unity relations we experience.
Okay, now my brain is starting to hurt. What does that actually mean for us in our daily lives?
Well, think about it this way. A unified object that you see, like a chair, it feels very different from the flow of time, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
But they both involve a sense of wholeness. The book gives some great examples. There are like spatial wholes. Those are the objects we perceive around us. Then there are temporal wholes, which are sequences of events experienced as one unit.
Like a melody.
Exactly. And there are even, get this, social wholes. The idea that like our identity is shaped by our social context.
So it's like our brains have different settings for experiencing different kinds of wholeness. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Exactly. Which makes you wonder, how does the brain actually create these different types of unity?
Right, like what's the mechanism behind it all?
And that's where things get really fascinating because Chapter 7 introduces this whole idea of the brain as a prediction machine.
Ooh, okay, so what's that all about?
It's a framework called predictive processing, or PP. And this is where neuroscience really starts to provide some answers.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this predictive processing. How does the brain, being a prediction machine, relate to our experience of wholeness?
Well, the core idea of PP is that the brain is constantly building models, right, to predict what will happen next.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just passively receiving information, it's actively trying to anticipate what's coming.
Exactly. It uses these models to kind of make sense of the constant stream of sensory data that it's getting. It's like your brain is always one step ahead, trying to figure out the world and create a coherent picture.
Okay, I think I'm following you. So it's like the brain is directing the show, so to speak.
I like that, yeah. Think of it like a movie director. They have the script, the model of what the movie should be. And then they direct the actors and film scenes based on that script. Our brains might work in a similar way, using models to direct our experience and create that sense of wholeness.
It's like our brains are making an educated guess about what's going on and then filtering the information to fit that guess.
In a way, yeah. And that filtering process might be what creates the feeling of unity. But here's the thing.
What's that?
These models aren't flat, you know what I mean? Like they're not just one-dimensional. They're organized in a hierarchy, like a set of Russian nesting dolls.
Okay, now I'm really picturing those dolls. So what do you mean by hierarchy?
So each level of the model, it predicts the level below it. And this creates this complex, multi-layered system of predictions.
Whoa, so it's like a chain of predictions, each one building on the one before it.
Exactly. And this is crucial for understanding how different levels of wholeness come about.
So it's not just predicting individual sensations, it's predicting patterns and relationships, and even entire scenarios.
You got it. Like imagine trying to predict the plot of a movie by just looking at individual pixels on the screen.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Impossible, right? You need to understand the scenes, the characters, the overarching narrative.
So the brain needs context to make accurate predictions.
Our brains may use a similar hierarchy to predict and understand the world. And that's how that sense of wholeness we experience might come about.
Okay, this is all making a lot of sense, but I have one more question. How do these predictions actually lead to the experience of wholeness? Like, what's the missing link?
Well, that's where the book's central concept comes in the idea that regularity equals unity, or RPU. And that's where we'll pick up in part 2.
Oh man, you're killing me with that cliffhanger.
Stay tuned. It's about to get even more interesting. All right, so remember that cliffhanger. Regularity equals unity. RPU. It's all about how our brains create that aha moment of wholeness.
By detecting patterns, right?
Yeah, exactly. By detecting and representing regularities in the world. It's all laid out in Chapter 9.
Okay, so our brains are like pattern detectives, constantly searching for connections in all that sensory data.
Precisely.
Hmm.
And the book has this really cool example to illustrate this whole thing. It talks about, what's it called? Biological motion perception.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. What is it?
So imagine you see a bunch of moving dots on a screen.
Okay, just random dots moving around.
At first, yeah, just random movement. But then suddenly your brain clicks and you're like, hey, that's a person walking.
Oh, wow. So it's like those moments when the puzzle pieces fall into place.
Yes, exactly. What was just noise suddenly becomes like a meaningful whole.
I can definitely relate to that feeling.
So what's happening there is your brain has learned to represent that specific pattern of movement, that regularity, as a whole person.
Even though all it's getting is a bunch of dots. That's so cool. But does this mean that every time we see a pattern, we experience wholeness?
That's a great question because, think about all the visual patterns we see every day, like tiles on a floor or the leaves on a tree.
Right, it's patterns everywhere.
So that brings us to another important piece of this puzzle. Attention.
Okay, so our brains have to choose which patterns to focus on.
Exactly. Chapter 9 is all about regularity, but it also points out that attention acts like a spotlight. It highlights certain regularities and makes them more salient.
So it's not just the patterns that are out there. It's also about which ones our brain chooses to tune into.
Exactly. Like, think about listening to a symphony orchestra.
Okay, I'm listening.
Dozens of instruments playing, right?
Yeah.
Each with its own patterns and melodies. But you can choose to focus on the violins or the cellos or the flutes.
You're not changing the music itself, but you are shaping how you experience it.
You got it. So it's similar with our brains. We're constantly curating this experience of wholeness by deciding which patterns to prioritize.
But that makes me think, what happens when that process goes wrong? What if our brains have trouble detecting these regularities?
Ooh, that's where it gets even more
Does
interesting.
does the book address that?
The book explores how these disruptions in the brain's ability to represent regularities can actually lead to altered experiences of unity.
So, like, we might not feel that sense of wholeness.
Yeah, or it might be distorted somehow. It even touches on conditions like derealization and depersonalization disorder.
Oh, wow. Those disorders where people feel disconnected from the world and even themselves.
Exactly. It sounds really distressing to experience that kind of disconnection.
It does. Does the book offer any insights into why that might happen?
It suggests that these feelings of unreality might be linked to, get this, problems with interoceptive predictions.
Interoceptive predictions. Huh. Okay, break that down for me.
So interoception is all about sensing your internal bodily state, like your heartbeat, your breathing, whether you're hungry, all that.
Like our internal radar.
Yeah. But if your brain's predictions about these internal sensations are off, it can create this feeling of like disconnection between your inner world and the external world.
Oh, wow. I see. So your brain's not getting accurate information about what's happening
Yeah.
inside your body.
And that could mess with your overall sense of wholeness, make things feel less real.
That makes sense. Is there anything else the book touches on in this area?
Well, it briefly discusses autism spectrum disorder too.
Okay, interesting. How does that fit in?
Well, you know how sometimes individuals with autism might focus more on local details rather than global patterns?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, the book suggests this might reflect a difference in how the brain organizes information, potentially leading to a different way of experiencing wholeness.
So it's like different brains have different settings for how they perceive and experience unity.
It's not a one-size-fits-all phenomenon, that's for sure. And I think this is really where the book's insights become valuable. It helps us understand that our experience of a unified world, it's not some mystical, like, given thing.
Yeah, it's not just magic.
It's the product of our brains, constantly searching for and representing these regularities. It's a process, not just a state.
It's really amazing and also kind of humbling to realize that this feeling of wholeness, something we usually take for granted, is actually this incredibly complex feat of neural computation.
Absolutely. And I think it raises some thought-provoking questions about other states of consciousness. States where this sense of wholeness might be experienced quite differently.
You know, this whole conversation about wholeness in the brain, it really makes me think about those moments when people report feeling this like profound sense of oneness, like they're connected to everything.
You mean those kind of mystical experiences?
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious if this framework of regularity and prediction can explain those too.
Well, that's a great question. And it kind of pushes the boundaries of what we've been discussing. You see, the book mostly focuses on our ordinary everyday experience of wholeness,
Right.
but it definitely makes you wonder about those altered states of consciousness, like what people experience during meditation or maybe with psychedelics.
Exactly. People often talk about this deep sense of unity in those states, like a feeling of interconnectedness that goes beyond their normal perception.
Right.
So could it be that those experiences, they involve different ways of representing regularities, leading to a completely different kind of wholeness?
It's a fascinating thought. Maybe in those altered states, the brain is able to, like, detect these subtler regularities, connections that we usually wouldn't pick up on in our everyday awareness.
So it's like our perception is tuned to a different frequency, revealing hidden patterns.
Yeah, something like that. Like those patterns were always there, but we just couldn't see them before.
Or maybe those experiences, they temporarily like disrupt the normal hierarchy of predictions in the brain.
And that leads to a sense of unity that goes beyond our usual way of perceiving things.
Right. It's pretty mind-blowing to think about the possibilities.
It really is. And it shows us how much we still don't know about the brain, about consciousness. This book, it gives us a really powerful framework for understanding our day-to-day experience of wholeness. But it also opens up all these new questions about just how much our experience can change.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things about this whole topic. There's still so much to explore. So if you're listening and you're like me and just totally fascinated by how your brain creates this whole unified world out of all the chaos,
Out of a jumble of senses, yeah.
I can't recommend Wanja Wiese's book enough. It's a bit of a challenging read, I'm not going to lie, but it's so worth it.
It'll totally change how you think about your own experience, I guarantee it.
And you know what? As you go about your day-to-day, just take a moment to really notice how you experience wholeness.
Yeah, pay attention to those times when the world just seems to click into place.
When you feel that sense of order, connection, even in the middle of all the craziness.
You might be surprised at what you discover about those incredible predictive powers of your own brain.
This has been such a fun deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.